Welcome to Most Life's Ahead of the Curve series, where each week we interview someone who is changing their world in a unique way. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here at the Ahead of the Curve interview series. Today, I'm super excited to announce author Carol Bradley. We have her picture here with us and her audio, and you'll enjoy her conversation and her presence here as well. Unfortunately, our video is not fully functional at this point, but the interview is going to be great. You're going to learn a lot about Carol, who has written about animal welfare in the past. She started out as a journalist and studied animal law and animal welfare at Harvard as a Nieman Fellow, wrote a terrific book on puppy mills called Saving Gracie, and her current book now is Last Chain on Billy. It's the saga and the redemption, basically, of one particular elephant who is now at the elephant sanctuary. And Carol was just there this past weekend, so she's got a lot of updates for us. And let me just turn it over to welcome you, Carol Bradley, to Ahead of the Curve here at Most Life. Welcome.
Thanks, Mo. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. So, Carol, your journey to profile animals and their struggle as captives by humans is certainly a remarkable one. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you into this storyline of animal welfare?
Sure. Well, when I was a little girl, I was really struck by a story that my grandmother would tell that in 1916 in Kingsport, Tennessee, she witnessed a circus elephant turn on her handler and basically stomp him to death. And that kind of filed away in the back of my head as something that seemed unusual. And, because as a child, I thought, what could be more fun for an animal than to be in the circus? But it was really much later in life that I started to realize there's a real underbelly to the animal world and the way we treat animals. And I was particularly interested in animals used for entertainment purposes, and had to spend some time trying to figure out how to get my arms around this subject. I learned from writing my first book that the publishing world really wants to see a story told in a subject matter that can be grim. If I could follow one dog who had escaped a puppy mill, or one elephant who was rescued from circus life, that would be a way to get readers involved. And so that's the approach that I took with both books.
Well, that's a great approach, and certainly I know everyone likes stories, and I know most people enjoy stories on animals. Unfortunately, in reading Last Chain on Billy, which you know that I did over the past month and a half or so, I was at the elephant sanctuary a couple of months ago. The story is difficult because the treatment that we humans have historically done to animals, elephants in particular, is a hard story to get through. Tell us a little bit about Billy's struggles and her final redemption at the elephant sanctuary.
Well, Billy's early life is so similar to that of other circus and mini zoo elephants, and really is something that hasn't changed in the last 150 years to any appreciable degree. She was born in India in 1962, and she was brought to the U.S. when she was about 4 years old. She spent the first 6 years of her life, from the time she was 4 till she was 10, at a zoo in Mendon, Massachusetts. It was the Southwick Zoo. And she was by herself for the most part in a pretty small corral with no forms of enrichment, no family members around her. We now know that elephants left in the wild and left to their own devices, a baby elephant would really never leave her mother's side her whole life. She would spend her life with her mother, her aunts, her cousins and sisters, and family bonds are huge to elephants. So to take this baby elephant away from her mother was a traumatic event for her, probably something she will never completely get over.
Right.
When she was 10 years old, she was sold to a man who leased elephants and tigers out to circuses. And she underwent training to become a circus elephant. And she, by all accounts, was very smart and caught on pretty quickly. But she also started rebelling a little bit. She wasn't happy with this new life. She was traveling in the back of semis and having to go out, a couple times a day to perform under harsh lights, with blaring music, which is something that affects elephants greatly. And her first trainer described her as a little snappy, and that, that was the beginning of her reputation as maybe not the most compliant elephant in the world, and certainly she would not have been alone in expressing some rebellion over this new life. But Billy traveled, she traveled for 23 years on the road. She appeared with shrine circuses all over the country, the same kind of circuses that still wind their way through smaller towns in America. I live in Great Falls, Montana, and we still get a shrine circus through here every winter and spring. And so for 23 years, this was her life, and she performed with a troupe of elephants called the Hawthorne Five. And they were quite adept at performing very difficult tricks. And, Billy could stand on her hind legs, she could stand on her front legs, she could rotate on a tub. She could do the most difficult trick of all, and that was to balance all 8,000 plus pounds of herself on one leg. That is really difficult for an elephant to do, and it's risky too, because if she were to fall over, just all that weight is very injurious to her joints and just risky. But anyway, she did perform, but in a couple of instances she attacked her trainer, which again is not unusual in the circus world. A lot of elephants just kind of simmer with rage at the confinement that they're forced into experiencing, the constant chains that they have around their legs when they're not in the ring. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture ordered her to be taken off the road. I don't quite understand why they chose Billy for this, because some of the elephants she traveled with actually killed people. But maybe the federal government wasn't aware of that. I don't know. At any rate, she was taken off the road in 1995, and she spent 11 years in a dark barn outside of Chicago. No exercise to speak of, no enrichment. She had a stall that she shared with two other elephants that was about the size of 2 parking spaces. So just really a dungeon was the type of situation Billy was in.
So Carol,
in 2004, she got a lucky break.
Go ahead. Yes. I mean, the story is painful, but please go ahead and let's make sure we hear where she redeems her freedom, I guess, is really the bottom line here. So sorry.
Well, there's a huge turn in Billy's story, because in 2004, the federal government ordered her owner to give her and the 15 other elephants that he owned up. They were neglected, they'd been abused, they were ill and needy, and so began her new life. It took a couple of years, and it wasn't until 2006 that she and 7 other of these elephants wound up at the Elephant Sanctuary in Hohenwald, Tennessee. There's only 2 elephant sanctuaries in this country. The other one is in California. But they are absolutely magical places, because they offer elephants who have been confined and forced to perform for so many years, or be in a zoo where they never even saw another elephant. It gives them a chance to experience the kind of freedom they probably forgot they ever had.
Right.
They get to form friendships. They're not with their families, their original families, but they are able to form friendships and spend their days in meadows, wading in ponds, draping their trunks around their friends' trunks, putting grass on each other's backs. That's something they do to protect themselves from the sun. And so, really, Billy's life took a huge turn for the better, and that was about 8 years ago. The reason I focused on Billy is that she was considered the most apprehensive of the elephants to come to the sanctuary, and she arrived with a chain still around one of her front legs. She was just too nervous and scared to let anyone close enough to take that chain off.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really convinced me that her story was the one worth zeroing in on.
And Carol, I think in both hearing you again today, which is powerful, but also in reading the book and just reflecting, and you and I have spoken about this, I don't think anyone can really resist drawing a metaphor or similarities or parallels to their own human life. Many of us have had struggles in our lives and have had to overcome different things. We kind of get comfortable with what we know, even though it might be painful. And I just feel so bad for Billy being kind of pegged as difficult when it was us who were creating the environment that caused her personality to be like that. That last chain, and certainly the name of your book, the title of your book, is certainly the poignant piece. That last chain on Billy, I think, represents to many of us, and I'll write about that in my Freedom, that's why I have the F over my shoulder here, in my Freedom newsletter. That last chain sometimes is the most crucial piece, because as we're going through our pain and our journey for freedom, it's like that last little piece of something we know. And one of our authors who wrote a book on her struggle with cancer and toxicity in her life, when she was in the down and out times of her cancer, she felt a compelling kind of somewhat twisted need to kind of go back to a life in her past that was not so good for her. And it's an interesting dynamic with the elephant Billy story and with our own as human beings on how we move from our constraints into our freedoms. And I know you've had other people talk about that with you, and that last chain piece really is the story.
Yeah, well, I was impressed by the fact that Billy, to a certain degree, never quite totally gave in to the system. She retained a sense of herself, and there are people at the sanctuary who believe that by the time the chain actually came off, which it did, mm-hmm. It had sort of become white noise to her, but it was certainly symbolic to the rest of the sanctuary staff. It was an ugly symbol of her past. Right. And I think, one thing we can take away from her story is that, yeah, we all have chains around us in some form or fashion. And, I guess the message is to keep on keeping on. Right. Because Billy, she was defiant. She did express anger. She, to this day, is somewhat unpredictable. But she has also not let the suffering in her past completely consume her. She has learned to experience joy mm-hmm. and happiness to the degree that we can see that in an elephant. She is capable of acting very silly. She loves to just have little choruses with her two best friends, Frida and Liz. And she just absolutely adores going to the pond and wading, and she finds things that really make her happy. Mm-hmm. And something inside of her enabled her to overcome the past. I mean, there are moments where she still is wary and unpredictable. And the feeling is that probably Billy will always show some of those mixed feelings about the people around her because she really had no trust in humanity, and
Right.
she still needs to work with humans in this setting, but it's all positive.
Right.
But yet she's been able to move on, and I am very impressed by that about her, and just admire her resiliency so much, which is something we all need to have.
Right. And you were recently at her birthday party, I believe, right?
Well, I was in Nashville last weekend. She had a birthday party. There was a fun run for Billy.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I was not able to be at it because I was giving a talk at the Southern Festival of Books. But yeah, Billy is very beloved by the sanctuary staff, and I think there's just something about her story that really resonates with people. And yet, really, all of the elephants at the sanctuary have very poignant backstories, and I think there's a lot we can learn from all of them. And, we can get on the sanctuary's website, which is just elephants.com. They have 14 cameras that keep track of these elephants, and very often, usually through Facebook, you have to like the sanctuary Facebook page to get these messages, but they will often get on there and say, hey, check out one of our Ellie cams. Shirley and Tara are playing with one another or whatever.
Right.
And it's very heartwarming to see these elephants in a natural setting, which is something they probably never thought they would ever experience again.
And I've got to tell you, I mean, from our conversations as we got to know each other, a couple of months ago when I was at the Elephant Sanctuary, I featured the reunion, and you remember the names of these elephants better than I do, and my T newsletter, which was Togetherness, I featured the reunion of, who were the two elephants again that did the reunion that...
Is it Shirley and Jenny?
Yes.
Shirley and Jenny?
Yes. And their reunion was so emotionally charged and brought me into the whole elephant awareness, actually. And I learned about elephants' social needs and desires for being together and their long-term family bonds. And to me, that's the same type of togetherness that humans have. And I think that might be why so many humans resonate with the elephants. What have you kind of learned in the stories that you've been told as people have gotten to know you, read your book, and share their elephant kind of metaphors or their longings for those animals and what they see in them relative to the freedoms?
Well, I think there's something about elephants that really touches a deep part in people, because we see some of the most noble attributes that we possess. We see them in elephants. They're extremely loyal to one another. They're very protective of one another. The aunts and the older sisters of a baby elephant will help raise that baby elephant. And I think we can all learn from that, because sometimes, we get caught up in our careers and other pursuits, and we sort of forget that family means an awful lot. And I think the resiliency that all of these elephants have shown, the ability to almost forgive humanity for what we've put them through, is very touching. You can't overstate the power of forgiveness. And I'm sure some people would say, well, it isn't in an elephant to forgive. They don't have that sophisticated of an ability. But I would argue that they do. They apparently do.
Yeah,
or otherwise, they would flee from everyone who ever approached them at the sanctuary.
Right. And, that's interesting that you talk about the forgiveness. The F that's over my shoulder is for freedom. But in one of my Togetherness newsletters, I actually talk about forgiveness and how that actually does allow us to reconnect with people, because throughout being in existence in this physical planet, we do come across conflict and misunderstandings and opinions that rub different ways with different people. And certainly when you talk about humans to animals, we don't expect animals to quote unquote forgive. And I think most people who have rescue dogs have some of that feeling that their dog never really loses that fear of being abused or neglected. But it does seem to me that elephants have another level of evolution and the ability to kind of step back and connect again, reconnect. And I think that's part of forgiveness, is when we can kind of reconnect with the same persons or species that may have hurt us in the past.
Yes, exactly.
So, Carol, I've enjoyed your book. You know that. I've enjoyed talking with you. Are there things that you can kind of distill out for freedom and for the whole aspect of breaking our chains, that you might be able to give some tips to our audience as they're exploring their self-reflection on freedom and breaking their last chain?
Well, I don't know. I'm no psychologist, but I think we show the better side of ourselves as human beings when we recognize the need for all species to have some freedom in their lives. I think it informs our lives, and we can appreciate the choices we're able to make and the autonomy that we have, and to remember that so many animals are completely at our mercy.
Right.
And I think to play a part in taking in my husband and I have 3 rescue dogs. We get so much gratification out of knowing that we helped give them a better life. And I know that the sanctuary has tens of thousands of supporters who also get that warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they are helping these elephants, these very deserving elephants, right, live life chain-free.
Right.
And, I think just being a little part of something like that helps us to appreciate the fact that we have it awfully good. Most of us in this country lead lives that are of such privilege and opportunity. And it's just a good reminder when you read about an animal who didn't have those choices for so long in her life, but finally does.
Yeah, and I think as I'm a proponent of most life and kind of getting the most out of one's life, certainly connecting with animals and being kind and joyous and allowing all beings to express their freedom and what their soul's intent is on this physical planet that we all find ourselves. I think when we extend that to the animal community, we do feel a greater sense of fulfillment as human beings, because we are the caretakers of every species, frankly, whether it be the fish in the seas. We're still caretakers. We had an interview with CEO of Urban Junket, the purse company that makes their purses out of recycled bottles, and she told us about this horrible floating plastic state almost out in the ocean, that as human beings we're not caretaking for our ocean because we have this horrible pollution out there, and it's affecting our brethren who are living in the ocean. So you're telling us a great story about land animals, and I think the appreciation and the connectedness of taking care of other species who inhabit this earth with us is a powerful thing to think about and to devote some of our energy toward, all of us. We appreciate your story. We really appreciate your interview here today and basically enhancing our Freedom Week with Most Life. I appreciate getting to know you and the book Last Chain on Billy. We'll be giving out a few copies of this book to some of our Most Life audience throughout the week, and we'll be sharing the story with as many people as we possibly can. And
well, that's okay. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a real treat, and continued success to you too.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk again.
Okay. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.